Okay, so in this lab we're going to look at configuring the Vyatta firewall and a little bit of Snort IDS. So the overall topology that we have is we have the Vyatta firewall here, we have a public network, a private network and a DMZ. In our case this will be ETH0, ETH1 and ETH2. We'll have a Windows server here and a Kali host here at .8 and the Windows at .7, and then we'll have a Ubuntu server at .7 over here. So we need to set up the default gateway on the firewall to make sure that these private hosts and the DMZ host can actually connect. So the main focus is really to set the firewall up to be able to perform our testing. And what we'll do for this is to actually copy and paste. We will, from the Kali machine here, we will create an SSH connection into the firewall, and then we'll copy and paste the commands into the firewall to make it easier so we don't have to type them out. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so here is my machines here. They're all cleanly set up. So I'll just start up the ones that I need. So I need Windows 7. And I also need Ubuntu. And the Kali on the DMZ. Okay, so that's now our setup. So let me open up the virtual machines. So this is Kali. And next Ubuntu. And Vyatta. And then finally the Windows 7 machine. Okay, so that's the all the machines that we need to get set up. So let's initially log into Vyatta. So the first thing I'll do is to make sure that we're starting from a clean instance. So I'm going to copy a default configuration into the firewall, and at least we'll know where we're starting from. So we're going to copy this default into the place that Vyatta picks up the configuration. And we'll put it into config.boot. Okay, and then we'll reboot. Okay, it just takes a little minute. So I'm going to use 12.12.12.0 for my private network and 12.12.13 for my DMZ. So both of those are 24-bit subnets. So 12.12.12/0.0/24 and 12.12.13.0/24. Okay, so we'll get logged in. Okay, so we can look at our configuration just to see that there's nothing really there just now. And so the first thing we'll do is we'll go into the configuration mode. So as we're logging in from the DMZ, we need to enable Ethernet 2. So we'll do that, and that is at 12.12.13.254/24. Okay, so we're enabling the port on the router to allow the Kali machine to be able to log into the firewall, and from there we'll create a SSH connection. Okay, so the only other thing we need to do now is to set up SSH. Okay, that's fine. We can have a look at the config that's there, and we can see that ETH2 has that address, and we also see that service SSH is enabled. So what we need to do now is to commit, and that's it. Okay, so we can have a look at the configuration just to make sure that we know where we are, and we can have a look at our interfaces, and we can see we only have one IP address set, 12.12.13.254. So now what we'll do is that we'll go to our Linux Kali machine. Here we go. Okay, so now what we need to do is to set up the IP address of this machine to be on the same network as the port we enabled in the firewall. Okay, so we'll just show that. Just make it a little bit bigger if we can from here. And okay, that's a little bit better now. So we're going to set up the interface. We can see the interface is named ETH0 on Kali, and it's up, so we don't need to enable it. We'll just set up the IP address. So we need to add 12.12.13.8/24, and it's through Ethernet 0. Now we'll set up the default gateway, IP root, add default via 12.12.13.254 and through Ethernet 0. Okay, so we'll just ping ourselves just to see that it's alive, and that's fine, and then we'll ping the default gateway, and that's alive. Okay, so that was the that was the port that we enabled there. If we try Nmap against the firewall, hopefully we should see that SSH has been enabled on the firewall. Just takes a little minute, scanning all the ports just now, and it should show us that SSH is alive. Okay, so that's great. So now what we'll do is that we'll SSH into the firewall. So it's 12.13.254. Yes, and the password is that. Let's try again. Oh, sorry. What I need to do is to enable the login for the user VYOS and enter the password now. Okay, so we can now see the prompt has changed. We've now logged into the firewall, so we don't need to go back to the console. We can do everything from here, hopefully. There's our show interfaces command. Only one interface is set just now. Now what we need to do is to be able to set the interfaces and also enable NAT. Okay. Right, so we'll go to our security site, and we want vpart 1. Okay, so this is the configuration that we want to set up So just let me bring up another Word document and then I'll just paste that in. So my addresses are 12.12.12 and 12.12.13. We've already put this command in, but it doesn't do any harm to put it in again. It won't accept it. And for this one, we want source addresses from the private network and source addresses from the DMZ. Okay, so just make sure that you check everything's fine there. The default gateway looks fine. The two IP addresses look okay. And it's DHCP for ETH0. Our outbound interface is the public network. This is the private, and this is my DMZ. So everything looks fine there. So what I can now do is I can now go into configuration mode and I'll paste that. Okay, so I now commit and I should be able to show the configuration from there. Okay, so if I quit from here and I show my interfaces, then we can see that the public network has got an interface and the ETH1 now has an interface IP address. Just check my connectivity from the firewall and that works. Okay, so everything's working now. I've got the ETH0, I've got the two interfaces, and hopefully NAT is set up. So what I can do now is I can go to Ubuntu. I can go to Ubuntu, if I can find it, and set up Ubuntu on the private network. Okay, so let's get the commands. In this case, we can see the interface is down, so we just need to bring the interface up first. And it's called ENS32. Just get the command right. And then set up IP address add 12.12.12.7/24 and ENS32. There we go. Okay, now I'll add my default route. Okay, and just forgot to add the VM. There we go. Okay, so we should be able to view our default gateway, and fingers crossed we can see that we have internet connectivity. So we need to make sure that we have our DNS set up. So we go to resolve.conf and you can see it's not the right address there, so we'll just set that up. And we should be able to now ping google.com, and that's working perfectly. Okay, so everything is working on Ubuntu. Now what we'll do is we'll get our Windows machine set up. First thing we need to do is to set up our network. this is 12, in my case 12.13.7, 255.255.255.0, and 12.12.13.254. After DNS, let's do 1.3.254. Okay, so that's just been set up now. So 12.12.13.7 and 12.12.13.54. So let's see if we can ping our default gateway, and that's great, we can. So we'll try to ping 8.8.8 and it's working, and we'll try to ping google.com. That's working too. Now we'll try to ping the Ubuntu machine 12.7, and that's working too. Okay, so what we'll try is we'll have a look at the Ubuntu machine and see which services are running there. So 12.12.7, we'll run an nmap, and we'll just take a little note. So from Windows to Ubuntu, we have FTP, SSH, HTTP, and so on. Now I should be able to go to Ubuntu and do the same thing. Nmap 12.12.13.7, that's a Windows machine, and we can see there are a lot of services running there. Echo, discard, daytime, and so on. We can see HTTP is running there. So hopefully we should be able to get access to the web server on the other side. We can see we can get access to Google here, but we'll try 12.12.12.7, and there is the Ubuntu server set up. And the same again, we should be able to go to Firefox here, and we want 12.12.13.7, and there is the Windows server there. Okay, so everything is now working up to this point for the connectivity. Now what we'll do is we'll apply some firewall rules. Okay, so the next part is part 2. Get here, and these are the rules that we want. There's no change here that we need to make, especially for this firewall. So we'll just open that up, and we'll go back to our Kali machine. We're still logged in here, so we'll get into configuration mode. And now we'll just paste that in. Okay, so the way that this works is from private to DMZ, we'll allow all the connections that have already been made, but we'll also accept connections on port 80 and 443. For DNZ to private, then we won't accept any incoming connections. We'll only accept it if it's been allowed already. Okay, so once we set this up, then we shouldn't be able to connect at all, apart from opening up port 80 and 443 from the private to the DMZ. So let's paste that in. Okay, and then we'll quit. Okay, so just showing we can show our firewall settings. But now, when we run nmap, watch what happens. Okay, nothing. So all the ports have been blocked, where before we could see all the services. Now if we go to Ubuntu, we should see that only the 2 ports that we opened up will be seen. Okay, so we could see all these ports before. Now what we should see is that only 80 and 443 would be allowed to go through. Because 443 wasn't actually open, we'll only get port 80 opened. Okay, well, it is actually there. So the 2 services that we can see from private to DMZ are HTTP and HTTPS, where over here we got nothing. So hopefully when we go back here, that still works. But now when we try to open up the firewall here, open up the web page here, if we go to 12, there we'll see that we can't connect anymore to the web server because it's been blocked. Okay, and even ping will not work anymore because that's also blocked. Okay, so now the firewall is kicked in, we can't actually do anything even like ping anymore. We would have to enable that. Okay, so what we should find is that we should have lost the connectivity to the internet, and when we go over here we should find that there is no internet connectivity at all, and that's because we've set up the firewall. Now what we'll do is that we'll now enable access from the private network to the internet or the public interface. So from here, if you look at it, we have rule 1. From private to public, we have rule 1, which will accept all of the connections. Then this rule from public to private accepts anything that's been accepted to come back in again, because it doesn't do any good to just allow one way and then for it not to come back in. So in this case, we allow out, and then this rule will allow anything that's been allowed out back in again from there. So we'll just take that, and then we'll just find our Kali. Okay, we're still here, so that's great. So let me paste that in. Just let me sure that I've got that correctly. Copy and just paste that in here, just to make sure that we have that okay, and we're not taking an old config. Okay, so everything looks fine there, so we'll just copy that one and we'll just paste it in there. That's fine, and then we'll commit that. So we should find that there is still no connectivity from the DMZ, but now when we go back to Ubuntu, hopefully, fingers crossed, we didn't get connectivity before, it now works. And the same again, we can ping google.com and that works too. Okay, so in the lab, you can now go ahead and create a firewall rule to allow the DMZ to get access to the internet. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll just set up a very simple example of Snort. So with Snort we have a config, a rules file. So just let me create a rules file, so I'll call it myrules.rules. And there we go. So we'll just alert TCP any going to any host on port 443. And then we need to define an SID, and also we need a message. So let's make the message web connection. Okay, and that's all we need there. So just have a look at, see if we've got the rules okay. That looks fine. Now what we'll do is we'll run Snort with the rules and the interface. And I think we have ENS32 minus L log minus K. We'll make ASCII logs. So the one thing that you'll see is that we've got to create the folder log. So let's create that. And we'll run again. And we'll run it with sudo because we're accessing the network interface. Okay, so just ignore that warning that we get there. What we'll do is we'll just access Google. Okay, and then maybe intel.com. That's fine. Okay, Control C. And hopefully we should see there are some rules that have fired. Okay, so we've got at least one alert there. So we'll go into log, and here we see there is a folder that actually has our network packets in it, but there is also an alert. So we'll just have a look at alert, and there is our network connections that we've got there. So that was the connection to Google, possibly, or Intel. Let's see if we can do it. And then let's look up on intel.com. And for Google, it might be a bit difficult to see the IP addresses, but you can see that was 142. Yeah, so that connection that we made, the one that's been detected, is the Google one there. Okay, so if I cat alert, there we can see the destination IP address and so on. And also if we look in this folder, I don't need to change mode. You should be able to see the details of the connection that we've made there. Okay, so that's kept a log of the connections that we have. Okay, so that's shown a brief introduction as to how you set up Vyatta with an SSH connection, and also a little introduction to Snort. Okay, thanks.